The alarm on my depot door never rings at midnight for a good reason, so when it rang that night, my hand was already on the counter, ready to reach for the comm. I opened the door and found a woman standing in the freezing docklight, a child asleep against her shoulder, her gray skin dusted with frost, her copper eyes locked on mine, like she had been running for hours, and I was the only door left standing open. My name is Callum Ward, and I run a supply depot on the far edge of Kesh Station, a place where cargo runners and drifters stop to eat and refuel before vanishing back into the dark. The war between humans and the Ashfall clans ended 6 years ago, but out here, past the reach of compact law, old wounds do not close quietly. People still flinch at gray skin. People still lock their doors a little tighter when an Ashfall ship docks nearby. The woman at my door was Ashfall. I knew it the second I saw her. "I need work," she said. Her voice was steady, but her arms were shaking under the weight of the sleeping child. "I can cook. I will work for food and a room, nothing more." I should have said no. Half my customers had lost friends in that war. Feeding an Ashfall widow in the middle of my own depot was the kind of decision that could burn my business down in a week. But the child stirred against her shoulder, opened her eyes for half a second, and looked straight at me, and something in my chest that I thought the war had hollowed out completely just gave way. "Kitchen's in the back," I said. "Room upstairs is small, but it's warm." Her name was Sevi. The child was her daughter, Ithri, barely 4 years old. Sevi never mentioned a husband, and I never asked. Out here, grief is a locked door, and you learn fast not to go knocking on someone else's. Within a week, Sevi had turned my dusty kitchen into something people talked about across 3 docking rings. Runners who used to grab a ration bar and leave started sitting down for a full meal. Within a month, my depot went from barely surviving to the busiest stop on this stretch of the rim. Sevi worked like she was trying to outrun something, dawn until dark, never complaining, never resting until the last plate was clean. Ithri became a small shadow in my storeroom, sitting on an overturned crate near the stove, watching me work through cargo ledgers while her mother cooked. She rarely spoke to strangers, but she watched everyone, quiet and sharp, the way children do when they have learned early that the world is not always kind. I noticed her eyes on the 3rd week, copper, like her mother's, but when the kitchen lamps caught them at a certain angle, they flashed a shade I recognized instantly, a shade I had only seen once before, on a ridge above a place called Vantor Hollow, 6 years earlier, in the last brutal winter of the war. I told myself it was nothing. Grief plays tricks on grieving people, and guilt plays worse tricks on soldiers who never quite left the battlefield behind. I buried the thought under paperwork and told myself to leave it alone. Then one evening, Ithri knocked a jar of dried spice root off the counter, and I dropped down without thinking to help her clean it up. She looked straight at me, the way only a child can, without any filter, without any fear, and said the words that stopped my heart cold. "You are the soldier from my father's stories." The kitchen went silent. Sevi's hands froze over the pot she was stirring. "Ithri," she said softly, "that's enough." But I was already sitting back on my heels, ledger forgotten on the floor, because I knew exactly which story the child meant. There was only one story from that war that could ever connect to me and an Ashfall officer at the same time, and it happened on a ridge that still visited me in my sleep. Vantor Hollow. My unit had been pinned down for 6 hours, cut off from support, our wounded stacking up faster than we could carry them. The Ashfall commander on the ridge above us had every advantage. He could have ended us in minutes. Instead, he held his own soldiers back. He let us drag our wounded out under a flag that neither side had agreed to honor. Later, in the strange, quiet hour before the fighting resumed, we met halfway across the frozen ground, 2 enemies with nothing left to prove, and shared a canteen of water between us. He told me his reason in 3 words. Enough boys died today. I never learned his name. I never had the chance to ask before my unit was pulled out at dawn. "Your father," I said slowly, my throat tightening around every word, "was an officer at the Hollow." Sevi's copper eyes met mine across the kitchen, and for the first time since she had walked through my door, I saw past the tired, careful mask she wore for a human employer. Underneath it was something raw, something that had been carrying this exact moment for a long time. He spoke about you for a year afterward, she said quietly. The human captain who sent water and medicine across the line that night. He never learned your name either, but he told me, more than once, that it was the first time in the whole war he believed peace might actually be possible, because two enemies had managed, for one single hour, to simply be men instead of soldiers. I had not sent that water for glory. I sent it because he had given me back 40 of my people who should have died on that ridge, and I could not carry a debt like that and do nothing about it. He didn't live to see the armistice, Sevi continued, her voice catching. A different front, 8 months later. I didn't know, when I came looking for work at this station, that I would end up cooking in the depot owned by the reason my daughter still has a story where her father is remembered as good. I looked over at Ithri, who was watching us both with patient curiosity, too young to understand why the grown-ups had suddenly gone quiet and strange, only old enough to know that something important had just happened in the room. He was good, I told her gently. Your father was the finest soldier I ever faced, and the best man I only got to know for one single hour. Sevi wiped her face quickly with the back of her wrist, the brisk, business-like motion of someone who needed to keep moving before the feeling became too heavy to hold. The stew is going to burn, she said, turning back toward the stove. I let her have that moment, because some exits are the only kindness you can offer someone who is holding too much at once. That night, after Ithri had fallen asleep upstairs, Sevi came and sat across from me at the long table in the depot's main hall. She brought 2 cups of strong tea, the kind the runners drank to stay awake on long hauls, and set one in front of me without a word. For the first time since she had arrived, she told me his name. Veker Ashan Threll, a line commander in the Ashfall forces, a husband, a father, a man who, on one impossible night on a forgotten ridge, chose mercy over another, kill added to a tally that had already grown too long, and in doing so, without ever knowing it, saved not only my soldiers, but eventually gave his own daughter a safe place to stand, in a galaxy that had not yet finished learning how to stop hating people like her. I am glad it was you, Sevi said finally, turning the cup slowly between her hands. Whatever debt the war left open at Vantor Hollow, I think it never really closed. It just found its way to my door anyway, 6 years later, in a different shape. I lifted my cup toward her, a small, quiet toast between two people who had never expected to end up on the same side of anything. Then let's just say we're both still paying it forward. She almost smiled, a small, tired, honest smile, the first real one I had seen from her since the night she arrived, frozen and desperate, with a sleeping child on her shoulder. Word of what happened that night never spread past the depot walls, and I preferred it that way. Some stories are not meant for strangers passing through a station bar. Some stories belong only to the people who lived them, and to the small girl who would grow up knowing her father through more than memory, through the actions of a stranger who owed him a debt that could never quite be repaid, only carried forward. Outside the depot windows, the false dawn of Kesh Station began to spread its dull orange light across the docking bays, the same slow color it always was, indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. Somewhere above us, in a small warm room I had given without knowing why, a 4-year-old girl slept peacefully, safe in a life that existed because two enemies, once, on a frozen ridge at the edge of everything, had chosen to be human instead of soldiers. The war took a great deal from both our peoples. It took names, it took futures, it took people who should have grown old surrounded by their families. But sitting there that night, with a cooling cup of tea in my hands, and a woman across from me who had every reason in the galaxy to hate the uniform I once wore, I understood something I had not let myself believe in a long time. Some debts do not disappear when the person who is owed them is gone. They wait, they travel, they find their way, quietly and strangely, to exactly where they are supposed to land. Enough boys had died on that ridge 6 years ago. That night, in a small depot on the edge of nowhere, something finally got to live instead.